Episode 6 of 7 Worlds, 1 Planet is called North America. So this episode opens up in the far north, in Canada, and here we see Canadian lynx. So the Canadian lynx is just roaming through the forests of the Yukon, and it hunts a snowshoe hare. So this is quite a good sequence, it is quite lively. The various attempts by the lynx to hunt the hare is really good. You see a couple of different hares and a couple of different tactics to get them. Ultimately the lynx does fail each time, which does highlight how, difficult it is to live in the far north. And it was a good sequence, it was better than I remember it being. I kind of remember it being a bit forgettable. I think in rewatch it was definitely one of the better parts of the episode. I did enjoy that, so that was really good way of opening the episode. And then we go a bit further south, we talk about all the waterways across America. There is quite a lot of interconnected waterways that feed into the Mississippi River, which I wasn't really aware of. I feel like the Mississippi isn't as famous as, say, the Nile or the Amazon, but it is still one of the biggest rivers in the world, so it's quite good to talk about. And here we see river chub. River chub are a type of fish that you don't really see very often, like most types of fish, to be honest. It was interesting watching the males build their little platforms out of pebbles. That was interesting. And then other males coming in to steal the pebbles. It reminded me a bit of the Adelie penguins in Frozen Planet, though it wasn't as entertaining as that. And we see the females are attracted to this platform, and the male's able to mate with them. It's fine. I feel like that kind of sequence was done better with other animals. But it was still alright, it was still a fine part of the episode. Then we talk about wildflowers, how there's a lot of wildflowers across North America. We don't really do much with that, we just talk about them being there and move on to the next thing, so we don't really spend a lot of time with that. And we talk about black bears in the Great Lakes. This is alright, it's fun seeing the black bears because they're cute. Them foraging on the coastline's cool, watching the mum eating the crabs, and the bear cub walking around with the starfish in its mouth is quite funny. Then a male comes along, they're in his territory, so the cubs have got to run and hide up a tree. It's fine, it's exactly the same as we got in the last episode with the brown bears though, so to be honest I was kind of like, did we need to see this twice? I think it's quite weird that they did film both sequences to make them so similar. It just kind of felt a bit repetitive because well, it's a different species, it's still a bear and it's doing the exact same thing that other bears do. So yeah, it was fine. Then we see fireflies. So the firefly stuff is cool because it looks very good. When I was remembering this, I was kind of like, okay, yeah, but it's just flashy. I mean, obviously quite literally flashy, but there's nothing more to it. The best part of the sequence was actually watching the fireflies get caught in the spider web because it's such a visually, stunning thing. It's very beautiful. To show that there is something more sinister going on in the background was quite good. So I did like that actually more than I remember it, to be fair, so that was good. Then we go to the Midwest, the big Dust Bowl area, and here we see prairie dogs. The prairie dogs are nice. They're very charismatic and very cute. And so I did like that. There's a lot of funny sequences of them just playing. Even them just jumping up to alarm each other is quite funny. And we see a badger comes along. The badgers in America look very different from the ones here. I feel like the ones in Europe look like kind of nice, bumbly little gentlemen, whereas the ones in America look like they would rip your face off. But here we see the badgers getting chased away by burrowing owls. However, it is still able to get in and get one of the pups. I feel like it's kind of weird because that is quite a cutesy sequence, but it doesn't end very nice. We see a baby prairie dog getting killed by a badger. Not the way I would normally have expected it to end. But I actually did think that was alright, it was a nice little sequence. And there's a little bit of a geography lesson here. There's not a lot of geography in this one. We talk about how there's air from the north and air from the south, because there isn't a lot obstructing them. They're able to meet in the middle, which then creates all these tornadoes. That was interesting, and the footage of the tornadoes is quite good. And then we cross the Rockies to the other side of this, which isn't really affected by any of that, and we see how dry it is. It is quite interesting looking at it from a satellite map, because everything east of the Rockies looks quite lush and quite nice, whereas to the west, most of it is pretty arid, and I feel like America is the country with the most diverse range of habitats. And in the desert, we see the roadrunner. So the roadrunner, much like the Tasmanian devil, is an animal that's been popularised by the Looney Tunes, but not one that you ever really see. Like, I don't think I'd seen roadrunners in anything before here, and it's just fun. The roadrunner does look pretty comedic. You just see it running around, squawking occasionally. It looks a bit silly, and it's just looking for prey, but it's not really able to get anything. It often tackles the wrong types of prey, like bigger lizards. It's able to get a centipede in the end, which kind of shows that even though it's putting all this work to look for prey, it's not really got much of a return on it. It does kind of make the roadrunner the butt of the joke, I thought. And it is quite a comedic sequence, but I feel like that's all done in the music and the editing, rather than the roadrunner being a particularly, funny animal. It just looks a bit weird and a little bit silly, and they do ham that up a little bit. Then we go back to the East Coast, mainly dealing in the south at this point. We see massive shoals of mullet, which basically go right up to the beach. And it's interesting to look at because there's people on that beach as well, and they're swimming amongst the mullet, so you see the mullet going around to avoid them. So there's probably a lot of people that aren't even aware that the fish are there. That's interesting. I will say this did feel a bit similar to what we got in the Australia episode. And then you see loads of tarpon coming in to eat them. That's cool. The sharks, the pelicans, it's all good. But I do think, much like the bears, it was a bit too similar to what we'd already got in the series. And I did think that previous sequence was better than this one. Though this is still interesting and not something you see that often, to be fair. So I did like it, but just not as much as I think I would have had I not seen something similar and better in a previous episode. So that's a bit gutting. Then we get into the proper deep south, into the swamps. And once again, because there's no mountains really blocking anything, cold air from the Arctic is able to get quite far south. So it actually does become quite cool in the winter. We've seen an alligator that's basically in a not quite hibernation state, but kind of similar. It's basically doing nothing but breathe at this point. It's just living off its fat reserves here. And we talk about manatees. The shots of the manatees are great. It's really nice watching the mother and calf manatees. And because it's so cold, the mother manatees have to lead their calves into warmer water. We see them going all the way down to Florida in these massive hot spring pools, which is really cool watching all these manatees there. It's very nice to see. Manatees are really nice to look at. I think they're really cool animals. Watching the manatee calf playing with the alligator, because much like the one that we saw earlier, it's not really in a state where it can really do very much. So it's quite funny watching this little manatee play with this, quite big alligator. That was fun. But also we kind of lead into more environmental stuff there. We see all the manatees have got scars, realistically from boat propellers. And as they pan out, we see all these manatees, and they're pretty much on the doorstep of humans. There's a lot of homes around there, and obviously that means there's going to be boats there. So it is quite sobering, and I thought that was a very well executed sequence. Then we go further north to Hudson Bay. We talk about climate change, how the ice in Canada is melting faster than anywhere else on Earth. And we see all these polar bears, and the polar bears, they're in the summer. It's not their element, so they're, going to be struggling to look for food. However, here in Hudson Bay, this small group of polar bears have learned to hunt belugas. So they actually do tease it very well. You see the polar bears clambering onto rocks, and we see they're waiting for something, but it really could be anything. Then, once again, using drone footage, we're able to see all the belugas come in around the polar bears, and it's a very well executed sequence. There's a lot of tension here. The music is great here. The music's great throughout the series. I don't talk about that enough, but it's very well executed here. They did a really good job of creating tension around the polar bears going out to catch the belugas. The belugas are pretty big. Even the calves are quite big compared to polar bears, and they're able to dodge them pretty well because as soon as they see them, they're off like a shot. The polar bears, while are very good swimmers, aren't as good as beluga whales, so they're definitely not in their element here. But we see the older males, the bigger ones, they're still waiting on the rocks, and they're patient. We see the belugas emerge around them, but they're still not going for them, and then all of a sudden it dives in, and it's able to bring down an adult, like one bite to the head and it's dead. It's really cool, because you'd have thought they would take a calf. There was a couple of shots of the younger belugas, I was like, okay, they're probably going to take them, but no, they went for adult, and they're able to bring it back, and it is interesting watching the polar bears kind of sharing the kill. You wouldn't normally see that, but it is very interesting, and it was a very, very good way of ending the episode. It was a lot of tension. That was really cool. You were on the side of the polar bears, but you also did feel for the belugas, and they did a good job of showing you that the belugas were not easy to catch. Earlier on, they say the belugas are quite slow swimmers, but to be fair, they were very wily, and they were very good at avoiding the polar bears. So you did feel there was actually a struggle there, which you maybe wouldn't have normally thought there would be. So that was a really good way of ending the episode, and I really liked that. Then we had the diaries. It's all about the people filming the polar bears and the belugas. This was really good. It was funnier than I expected. Watching the guy in the water try to get the close-ups of the belugas was really funny because he sings to them, and when he sings Adele, the belugas come right up to him. That was really funny. And then later on, when the polar bear comes near them and it's basically pissing about with their anchor and the boat drifts off into rocks, does show you it's quite dangerous. Then when they managed to film the hunt itself, they did show you how emotional it was for them, because ultimately, as much as it was really cool watching the polar bears hunt the belugas, and you're on the side of the polar bears, it is still pretty sad for them because, the belugas are really charismatic, so you don't really want to see them getting killed by polar bears. And again, another really good diary sequence from this series. So yeah, this episode is good. I feel like I've been quite positive in discussing this episode, but I think it might be my least favourite one from the series, but considering it is still pretty good and there's a lot of good stuff in here, that just speaks to how good this series is. This is a really good series. So yeah, highlights for me were the polar bears at the end. That's great. It's up there with the pumas. It's pretty brilliant stuff. The manatees I also really liked. Everything else is good, I would say, but they're the two bits that really stand out the most for me, to be honest. So yeah, let me know in the comments below what you thought this episode were your highlights. Let me know. And yeah, I'll be doing the next one next week, which is the last episode, and it's all about Africa, so look forward to that. And yeah, as ever, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, or don't if you don't want to. It's perfectly fine. And I'll see you next time, and goodbye.